welcome to the Greater Texas Podcast. This is a podcast about building a better Texas. As Texas has fantastic growth, we, on a monthly basis, will interview a leader from the area and talk about what that growth means and how it affects us. I'm Sean Bukowski. I'm the principal of Bukowski Law Firm, where we protect your commercial real estate assets from dirt to disposition. So honored today on this episode of Greater Texas to have Casey Seeboth here with us, the newest addition to Bukowski Law Firm. Casey, thanks so much. You've been, about 6 months or so now, or is that right?
Yeah, just a little over 6 months, yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate you joining us and talking about, we'll talk about, your history and your experience and then what you're up to now at Bukowski Law Firm. So let's talk a little bit, briefly about your background. Where are you from originally?
So I was raised in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area and lived in a suburb for my elementary and high school years, and then moved out for college, but still look fondly back on Milwaukee.
Did you go to Summerfest like a bunch?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Summerfest was a great time. It's kind of like an early model of some of the like South by Southwest in a way, but everything was contained in the fairgrounds downtown, which are pretty cool, right along the lake.
I this, but I grew up in Michigan, and my family still to this day spends a week on Lake Michigan on the Michigan side, and in July it's just like perfect weather, right? Mm-hmm. It's so great, and Lake Michigan's beautiful. So
big sand dunes on that side.
Yeah, there are. It's great. And then you came to UT eventually?
Yeah.
Where'd you start?
I did a year at the University of Iowa and really had wanted to move all the way to Texas. My parents did not. But I took a semester off. I worked a few jobs, saved some money, and got admitted to the university 3 times before finally enrolling in classes. And then finished out at, I actually finished my last semester of undergraduate school abroad. But got my degree from the University of Texas.
I actually didn't know that. Where abroad?
Nanjing, China.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You don't speak any Mandarin, do you, or do you?
Well, sure.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, here we go. It's a whole new line of business we can open up here. And why did you want to go to UT? Why did you want to leave out?
Yeah, at the time. There were a number of reasons. Primarily, they say, actually was told this in a seminar in law school. It was not related to classes, but how to get a job in the legal industry. Is when asked that question, don't tell them because of the weather. But truly, for me, I was
because of the weather.
Well, I like winter. I love to snowboard and cross country ski and sled and throw snowballs. But the reality is, at the time, I was I was interested in medicine originally, and that kind of morphed into kinesiology.
Okay.
I wanted to work with Olympic level athletes, and there were some in Milwaukee. There's an Olympic training facility there for ice skaters, speed skaters. But I was more interested in bicycling and long distance running. Triathlon really was a burgeoning sport, growing sport, and that was my interest. That brought me to Texas, where some of the best road cyclists in the world, including now, Lance Armstrong. This is his adopted home. Who's got some history, but that pulled me to Texas and kept me here for a long time.
Awesome. And then did you go straight through undergrad law school, or did you take time off?
No, I took a couple of years off. I, as I said, was in China for my last credits of undergraduate school. Mm-hmm. So my graduation date was like a year and a half after I left the University of Texas.
Gotcha.
From there, I went to New York and worked mostly in the restaurant industry for a couple of years. Well, about a year and a half, really, before moving back to Texas with my now spouse of, almost 20 years.
Hopefully she doesn't see this unless he's a hesitation.
Right. I was counting the years. So yeah, we moved back here in October 2003 and have been in Austin since then.
Gotcha. Awesome. And why did you decide to go to law school?
I had a great job when we moved back to Austin. Kind of my first, professional job was working for the Texas Bicycle Coalition, and among other things, I had the opportunity to lobby and meet with elected officials both in Washington, D.C. and here in Austin and in cities across the state, and really got to meet and learn about the work that we were doing to kind of change the law. And it really helped me appreciate how much the law touches all of our lives, and often in ways we don't think about. And when looking at kind of what to do for a profession, the line about everybody will need a haircut. Well, everybody's going to need a lawyer at some point. So I thought about it as being a pretty interesting and steady place to spend my effort as a human while on this earth, trying to make a living.
Gotcha. Great. And so then you came out of law school. Now you came to us from TDI. Was that your first job out of law school?
Yes. So I had a couple of summer jobs while I was in school, and one of them had me plan to move to Denver, and then 2008 happened, and I had a professor who directed me over, said, let me take your application over. I know somebody over at the Department of Insurance, and ended up being a really great fit. I had 2 children by the time I graduated law school. The second was born my last semester of law school.
Gotcha.
And, the reality is, working for the state, you did have a pretty regular schedule, 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, or however you wanted to work it, regular holidays and weekends. I had a lot of experience in the courtroom. It was the administrative court, both on hearing practice and pretrial practice, and also a lot of trials, about 35 days first year trial experience.
And so you started there in 08 or 09, somewhere in there?
09, June of 09.
So that was basically the heart of the first sort of real estate crash,
yes.
Or not the first, but the last real estate crash before this one. And obviously TDI regulates title insurance. So were there a lot of title insurance issues that came about during that time?
Yeah, it was really a great time for me to begin. I was working in the enforcement program. So we brought lawsuits against, from the top down, insurance companies and all the carrier agents, whether they're sales agents, people who are financing, people who are doing work for managing general agents for the companies. And I was assigned to 2 separate teams. One of the teams at the time was called Rate Title Financial, or something along those lines. And we dealt with cases concerning illegal, improper rates across all lines.
So,
and then
so
also,
the either the insurance company or the agent setting an improper rate?
Yeah. So I had a property and casualty case where they were literally charging extra, right? And it was a rate increase depending on the number of traffic violations you have, which it's weird. That's totally normal to underwrite that way, but in Texas it's illegal to increase your rates based on whether you've got speeding tickets. Bizarro, but that's a state law.
Okay.
There's a history behind that. I'll spare you that now. But anyway, so that was kind of rate cases we looked at, whether they were just too high, they couldn't be supported by their actuarial evidence, or something more technical like that case I described. Title cases, though, are far-ranging, including setting rates. I sat in on a couple of the rate hearing meetings, including the rate hearing that was getting going right as I got my law license. I, of course, wasn't practicing in that case, but was watching the testimony, the presentation of evidence as the state was setting a rate for title insurance, which is now done every 5 years, often on consent now, but is a contested process. And there were members of the industry. There were private homeowners who were represented by an attorney. And there were like 7 lawyers at the different tables, counsel tables at the administrative hearing room. It's fascinating.
Interesting. I didn't know that's how the rates were set. Like that there's this big of hearing.
And it's again, there's a lot of behind the room board meetings that go on to kind of work through those issues as they come up.
And so is that, I mean, we're getting lost in the weeds, but I find it fascinating. Is that a discussion between behind the board meeting between TDI and like the industry insurers? And then, do the property owners have a voice in this process?
Well, yeah, sure. They can if they choose to, but they often don't.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation, Sean. But I'll say this, the way it's set up in Texas, so the title insurers, there were a couple of them who participated directly, hired their own counsel. There was also there were a couple of industry trade associations. So the big one is TLTA, Texas Land Title Association. There's another one. There's a couple of other ones that represent the agents. I think there are a couple of them. In any event, there's also in Texas another governmental agency, which I thought was brilliant. So there's the Office of Public Insurance Counsel, who kind of sits on the consumer side. Then there's, of course, the industry side that lobbies for themselves, advocates for themselves. And then in the middle is the Texas Department of Insurance, kind of the voice of reason, so to speak. I thought it was anyway.
Right. What was your voice? So yeah.
I didn't advocate in those cases, just because after I came on board, we ended up working them out informally, which I think is a better practice in some ways, but also is fraught with issues. But one thing that I did, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off onto the rate making, because that was not a huge part of my practice there.
Yeah. My
practice mainly focused around lots of agent cases, but for industry cases, health industry cases, health insurers, and the third-party administrators who handle health insurance practice for the most part, including pharmacy benefit managers. And then the other line of insurance that I had a lot of experience with was title insurance, which is something that was really interesting to me for a number of reasons. One, because it's this unique product that is promulgated. We write the forms, the state, I don't say we anymore, but the state of Texas writes the forms with input from the public. It's a rulemaking process, largely driven by the industry, as most rulemaking processes are in the state and the federal government. And then the other enforcement practice was about disciplinary actions for violations. And when I started in 2008, 2009, I started as a law clerk in June. I got my law license in December. And after passing the bar that July. And 2008 financial crisis, has a little tail, but when the state figured out what was going on, jumped in with the other part of that team, Rate Title Financial. The state has disciplinary authority that's related to your license. You can take away a license or impose penalties or require restitution. Or just a cease and desist, stop doing that, an injunctive action.
Gotcha.
But then the state also has financial authority to basically put receivership actions, involuntary receivership actions and liquidation actions. Before that, there's a supervision action. And I was brought in early on. We had a team essentially to work with the lawyers who were handling the receivership authority, that kind of power, and my team, which was handling the disciplinary stuff.
Okay.
The
disciplinary, I mean, even though it's disciplinary, it's still a civil action, right? It's not a criminal action, right?
Yeah. So it's quasi-criminal, but my practice was civil law. We did the administrative work. We worked in concert to the extent that the law allows, but which is minimal. But we kept the criminal investigators informed to the most part about what we were doing. We worked our own investigations. The criminal investigators worked their investigations separately for evidentiary reasons and because the law is separate, the investigative authority. But, we let them know when we were getting ready to pursue actions so that we didn't step on their toes. And we could definitely pay attention to what was going on in court if a criminal action was underway at the time that I was working on my administrative case.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we worked closely for a number of years with our bankruptcy attorneys, essentially, who are both in the state, the Department of Insurance, and also the Attorney General's office. So we worked with a lot of assistant attorney generals to administer those receiverships and coordinate so that the licensing action, wasn't unnecessarily complicated because of a liquidation proceeding, for example.
Okay. And you were there for 15 years, right?
15 years, yeah.
And in court a lot, tried a number of cases to the administrative law judge?
Yes. Yeah, some of them were, quite a few of them were, we had a lot of default cases too for individuals who, maybe have walked away from their license because they knew they couldn't defend their case.
Gotcha.
So a number of my cases involved individuals, but I had a fair number of cases against title agents, attorneys, even a number of proceedings against title insurance companies for interesting issues. These are one of the things that kind of provided me some. This is something I could do beyond public service practice, kind of insight. But because the title policies are a state promulgated product, I was positioned to think through the rulemaking side of the insurance policy and all of the endorsements and rules in the underwriting manual, essentially in Texas, is the Texas Title Insurance Basic Manual, which is a series of rules that are available on the TDI website. And we could think through whether the policy was correctly issued, whether the proper underwriting guidelines were followed. And that includes both how the underwriting was done, what was the final product of title policy, and also things like whether the right rate, the correct premium was paid.
Gotcha.
And also the claims issuing, the claims handling side of things. We had a couple of cases where consumers had complained, and I use that term consumer because that's the term that the insurance department uses, generally speaking. But with title insurance, there are two types of policies that may be issued, both an owner's policy and a lender's policy. And so when I think about consumers, I had my perspective in prosecuting the case was both the insured on a lender's policy.
Right.
So big banks.
Right.
Big banks.
Right.
Were consumers, even though that's not generally what we think of as a consumer.
Yeah. No, that makes sense though.
And then I had, some homeowners who were complaining or not necessarily a small residential plot, but I had a person with an acreage lot that had a boundary issue that was really interesting to prosecute.
And then so then you left after 15 years. Obviously we were lucky enough to have you come here. What made you want to leave or go into litigation, civil litigation at a private law firm?
Pleased to be here. A number of things. I had always expected to carry my practice into the private sector. Landing in the public sector was not really part of the plan. Ended up being a really good thing while my children were young.
Right.
I was able to spend a lot of time with them. My youngest now is finishing. She's got a couple more years of high school, but she'll get a driver's license very soon.
Right.
We finally got her.
And then she's gone. Right.
The oldest is already out of the house in college. She might never move back, So my law school loans were forgiven through the Public Service Debt Forgiveness Program.
Oh, nice.
Which was enacted by George Bush, 2007. Kind of fortuitous timing for me.
Right.
So 10 years, it ended up being a little longer than 10 years to get it forgiven because of all the administrative headache. But after that was forgiven, I could finally start thinking about how to move my next step in my career and think through the type of work that I enjoyed doing and how to move forward. And as I looked at my practice, having talked with the lawyers that I know who were doing their own thing, and really started thinking about it, I was interested. I had my perspective on law shifted to be more court focused, litigation focused than the lobbying side and policy making that I'd been interested in when I started law school. And I was more interested. I have a wide ranging interest in human stuff, but I found that I had more experience with property law, real property law.
Right.
And that was more interested in doing that than traditional insurance practice where you're maybe defending insurance companies in the administrative realm or acting as counsel for an insured on behalf of an insurance company in civil court.
Right.
So
interesting. Well, that was obviously a great fit for us at here at Bukowski Law Firm, because we do obviously a lot of that litigation, and you're at this point head of our litigation area. How do you see that sort of developing as we continue to grow the litigation? What areas do you think are the areas that you'd like to focus on going forward?
Yeah, I think we have really a very interesting and fairly broad scope right now on our practice. We see a lot of landlord-tenant issues. We see our tax litigation cases that are constantly in the cycle. We see some title insurance claims come through. I have a lot of construction cases and cases involving homeowners, property owners insurance, condo association.
A lot of HOA stuff coming through lately.
A lot of HOA disputes.
Yeah.
We could see some insurance claims. I think our practice area is really interesting, and I hope that we can continue to see a lot of commercial property law cases. We also have the bandwidth to carry a lot of general business cases forward. And, I think as we continue to refine our practice with our cyclical tax case work, we can kind of strategically pick up cases that, may take a couple years to develop with the pre-trial litigation practice, investigation and discovery practice, and work towards more complicated issues that may need to carry forward past trial court. And we've got a couple right now we're working on that may have some, there may be potential for appellate work on a couple of cases. But even before then, we've got some collection work that we are trying for. Not all cases make a lot of sense to carry very far in litigation.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we have to talk with our clients about.
Well, it is. And I started as a litigator 100 years ago when I started, and have obviously since branched into transactional in the real estate world plus litigation. And one thing that you continue to see, litigation sucks for everybody, right? Like it doesn't make anybody happy, even if you're the one suing. At the end of the day, you're probably going to settle, and you'll be mostly happy, but not super happy, because the reason you're in litigation is for something went wrong, right? And so that's, at the end of the day, nobody loves being in litigation. And one thing we really see is that the sort of ounce of prevention on the front end can really help either avoid litigation, or when you get into litigation, set yourself up for success. And that's something that we just see over and over.
I think, I joke about a number of things. And one is that, especially when I was representing the state, people don't like to talk to lawyers. People would not like to return my telephone calls, and email is very difficult to get through to people. I would sometimes meet people in person if I really needed to get their attention on something.
Right.
And no, I get that. People don't like to talk to lawyers. And I think that is a very difficult issue, especially because lawyers cost money.
Yeah. And
that's something that I try to counsel people about early on, is just the reality of the expense and the headache. And sometimes you have to, I've heard it said, see your way through what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a way of the counseling that we can provide is how to make the best of a bad situation without digging in your heels and fighting forever.
I think that what you just said is really important, because it's kind of like, we look at this, and I try to always look at this from, a business standpoint. And at each point, you have to make a decision that is a rational economic decision. And, every time we start litigation, every single client says, it's not about the money, it's about the purpose or the whatever. It's about the principle. And I get that. And look, if it truly is, we'll fight to the wall for you.
There are cases where those human emotional interests definitely matter.
Right.
Property can be that way. In fact, that's one of the unique things about property, in that you can get special remedies like specific performance. Right. Property is different. Real property is different. I had a great professor in law school who I think a lot of people at the University of Texas remember fondly. And I took Ernest Smith for both property law and oil and gas law. And the thing he introduced about, as he said about property and oil and gas law at the beginning of the course, said he always enjoyed that practice area because it was just about the money.
Right. Right.
It helps. It helps when you can separate those frames of thinking about your problems. And it's not always easy to do that.
Yeah.
So we try. But, there are a lot of tools in the law. There are a lot of tools in the law. And you and I are in a wide range of arenas I didn't expect. I'll say one of the advantages of having practiced in administrative court is that I did learn about the overlap or intersection, or just the fact that you need to look at multiple sets of rules, because the state of Texas has separate Texas rules of civil procedure that are generally applicable in all courts and sometimes not.
Right.
And then you have in the administrative court, the State Office of Administrative Hearing has its own rules. You got to read those and know how those work. And then you have the judge's rules of the case. And at TDI had its own overlay of procedural rules,
right? Which
that was a whole other issue. But when we're in our municipal courts here for zoning, not zoning, but municipal ordinance issues, there's a separate set of rules than when we're in district court on a more of a contract case or a tort law theory that's just in the civil court. And being flexible to appear in different arenas gives me, I think, a different perspective on how to think about what remedies might be available, the best way to approach a dispute, which is really what we do. We say litigation, but it's dispute resolution.
Right.
And, a lot of cases, alternative modes might be the best approach. We talked about alternative dispute resolution as it was a course I took in law school.
Yeah.
How to think about other modes of resolving issues, problems, than just running off to court.
Makes sense. When I was a baby lawyer a long time ago, the head of the litigation department used to always tell us there's no substitute for reading the statute. You have to read the statute. I mean, I try to tell it to young lawyers. When you're doing a research project, the first thing you should do is read that statute. And then you can go about interpreting it. But if you don't know what it actually says, and to your point, it could be multiple different statutes and manuals and whatever. So
you gotta be careful too, because it's like statutes sometimes are out of date.
For sure.
But the ledge reference attorneys do a pretty good job of catching those. When they're passing new legislation, which is every other year journey in Texas. Sometimes it takes a full year to get through all the special sessions. That was one thing that was kind of fun at the state, was a part of my practice, like most senior attorneys, at least at the Texas Department of Insurance, and I imagine all the other state agencies. After you've been around a few years, you get asked, hey, here's the legislature is coming to session. You're going to get asked to review new bills as they get filed and provide your comments. And these are things that are internal, but ultimately the internal comment process might be boiled down to public pronouncements, right? The state can say things, they can't advocate for or against legislation, but the commissioner gives essentially a, this is how we think it's going to affect what we do,
right?
Kind of a statement. And so that was interesting to put in that perspective. Again, I said, I had done some policy making work before I went to law school and had a pretty good understanding of how to move issues we were a small interest group, the bicycle industry, bicycle users, bicycle manufacturers. There's a very small manufacturing business interest, but bicycle tourism is a thing. And, events, rides. So we brought those issues to the legislature, and I could kind of see how that lawmaking works. And that's an area that we haven't talked about a lot here at Bukowski Law.
Well, but that's actually something I wanted to, as we finish up here, talk to you about, because you've been in Austin a while and you obviously you're active in the community and have a lot of interest outside, just practicing law. And one of them is cycling. And like Austin's gone through huge growth in the last, 20 years. So what are you seeing as issues that interest you and you see as real issues for the city of Austin going forward?
Yeah, I think Austin has so many things going in its favor, and it has for so long. But there are a number of obstacles. I think one of the biggest obstacles facing Austin is the state of Texas. And I say that with both political overture and the reality of where we are in the North American continent. There's some advantages to being in Texas too. Certainly it's the energy capital. We have tremendous petroleum resources, which has funded most of our public education and infrastructure. A lot of the land value comes out of that. It's a double-edged sword, of course, because we are, I believe, confronted with, a changing climate that is largely being accelerated by human input. And I think the state of Texas is reluctant to acknowledge that because of our connections with the oil and gas industry, and I understand that, and it's a difficult issue. And I certainly sympathize with people who work in that sector, and certainly people who are dependent on that sector for other reasons, including those of us who live far away from our jobs and loved ones and depend on automobiles to get around. We also have tremendous solar and wind resources in this state, in this region in general, the Southwest. And I think we can do more to capitalize on that. I think there's already a lot of smart people who are making moves. And I saw this 20 years ago when I would go out I met people out in the Permian Basin who were adamant that wind is the next big thing. And they were already building wind farms out there. And now, if you ever drive through like Sweetwater in the middle of the night, you come into this beautiful valley. The whole thing's aglow with flashing lights from the windmills. We can talk about that a lot another time, but I think that's one of the things that Austin has going for it. We are, as a city, pretty environmentally conscious and have made a big move years ago to try to reduce our dependency on oil and gas. And consequently, we have a pretty sustainable electrical utility in Austin. Of course, we're dependent on the Texas grid, like almost everybody in Texas. The other thing that I think is great about Austin is the that appreciation for environmental realities. It comes from 150, 200 years ago when I'm sure it came from the Native American peoples too. There's places in Texas that are inhospitable and places in Texas that are more hospitable. And the Anglos settled along the Balcones escarpment up and down the I-35 corridor because of all the springs. We've got clean water. and some of the cleanest air west of Austin in the hill country. There's a lot of potential for human settlement here, but the rainwater percolates into the ground. We got to be really careful with the groundwater, and we only have so much of it. The further west you go in Texas, the less water falls from the sky, and we don't have an unlimited supply underground. And what's there has to be, used wisely. I think Austin has some advantages, and I speak about advantages rather than issues. I try to be positive here, in that we've, as a community, tried to rein in development out west of the escarpment and try to promote development east of I-35 and within the region of the city that's between where the land goes up. It's really where the land sank. Where the Edwards Plateau begins, though, that's real fragile limestone. Driving across it is complicated because of a number of reasons. I think Austin, the thing we need to, the problems we're facing are people want to live out there because it's beautiful.
Right.
And getting people from the places they live into the places they want to play has always been a problem. We need to think about how our infrastructure, like bridges crossing the river from Westlake and Bee Cave. There's two main bridges on 2222 and 2244. And, those bridges don't last forever.
Yeah.
Infrastructure, the more we build out our roadways, the more we got to expect that at some point we're going to be needing to repair that. So I try to think about our development patterns, and I think Austin is trying to promote a denser development pattern.
For sure.
And I think that's a good thing. I do think it brings problems too, that
Sure.
we can work, as a community, we need to work on to make that, to try to accomplish the goal of having people live in this area without depleting our natural resources and making the area inhospitable.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Casey. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you being at Bukowski Law Firm. We're really happy to have you. And thanks a lot. Thanks for being here.
Pleased to be here. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much for listening to the latest episode of the Greater Texas Podcast. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you'd like to hear some of the other great conversations we've had on this podcast, please go to BukowskiLawFirm.com. And when you're there, if you sign up for our weekly blog email, you'll be able to get updates to all of our latest podcasts. Otherwise, you can go anywhere that you watch or listen to your podcasts on a regular basis, and the Greater Texas Podcast is also uploaded there. Thank you very much.